So we've been covering the action of God in the world. And last week we talked about creation and how God works in that, which is one of the first things we attribute to God as far as his action in the world. So and we've mentioned a lot about creatures. What is a creature? A creature is anything that is created. It's where the word comes from. In other words, anything that is not God, because God is the only thing that is not created. He's the first cause. So anything that is not God is a creature, whether it's a being or a plant or mineral or even a virtue. Again, that's like goodness or a thought, anything that is created or that is not, in other words, anything that doesn't come, that is not God, is a creature. So creatures not being God are contingent. Now we've talked about contingency before. Contingent means that it's dependent on something. So creatures, because they aren't God, they are dependent on something. They're dependent on God. First of all, they depend upon him for their being, for their existence, because he created them. He created us. We're creatures. He created us. We are therefore dependent upon him. But that's not the only thing that he does for us. That's not the only way that we are dependent upon him. We're dependent upon him not only for our production, our creation, as the origin of our existence, but our maintenance, our continued existence. Is not that he just put something in, like evolutionists think, you have the primordial soup and it gets, or the Big Bang, everything starts and then continues on its own. No. We owe God our existence, but without God maintaining us constantly, we would cease to exist. We need his constant maintenance of us. Our preservation depends entirely upon him. And that's what we're talking about today, is the second action of God upon the world, the preservation of the world. The existence of creatures depends upon God, both as the creator and as the preserver of creation, in such a way that they could not, even for a moment, continue to exist if he withdrew that maintenance, that watchfulness. That we would go back into nothingness if he did not continue watching over us. And now, things in the world are preserved in existence, what we call, but in a different way. For example, you talk about preserving vegetables or fruits. You can them and help to preserve them. You freeze them to preserve them. You salt them or whatever to preserve them. But if, for example, that preserved fruit, you left it to sit out on the counter for a while, and it went bad, it would rot. It doesn't cease to exist. It just changes form. It still exists. You might not want to eat it, but it still exists. When a person dies, they are buried in the ground, and their life form may cease to exist, but they themselves do not cease to exist. That body changes form, becomes ashes ultimately. We're talking here, when we talk here about preservation, as far as God's concerned, we're talking about keeping that when he no longer preserves us, we totally cease to exist. We go back into complete nothingness, complete annihilation. That's so God's action in the world is keeping us from complete annihilation, going back to complete, to zero. Um, Preservation means that no quantity of matter perishes. Is the way the world looks at it. No quantity of matter perishes. It is a law in science called conservation of matter. That matter is never created or destroyed; it simply changes form. That you can even take an atom apart; it changes into maybe light and energy, but it's which are new forms, but it's still there. It still exists as some kind of matter. You can take that rotted food and put it out in the composting bin, and it will fertilize your plants. It becomes something different, but it still exists. So, and but with God, when we're talking about preservation again, with God, we're talking about if He did not continue His watchfulness over us and the universe and all of matter, that matter would cease to exist. Would not just change form, it would become zero, nothing. In reference to spirits or souls of men, we mean that they continue to exist without any substantial change. The soul part of you never changes. Again, it's a spiritual, therefore it's simple. It doesn't change. It goes on into a next life. It continues its existence in a different place, but it still exists. Your body may change form, but your soul won't. So how can we prove this preservation that God exercises upon the world? Because that's what, again, the whole purpose of this course is to give you information that you can use to prove to others who don't believe in this, that they believe that mankind, first of all, didn't come from God, and that He continues on His merry way, and just, yes, He will change from one form to another because He'll go die and going back into the ground. But again, it's not God doing it, having anything to do with anything. So there's two proofs that we can use. The first proof lies in is the fact that the dependence of the world on the Creator is an essential dependence. An essential dependence. It's a necessary dependence. It's like the dependence of heat upon fire or light upon the sun. But it's not the same kind of dependence as like a statue upon an artist. The two are different. Both are dependent, but the first is dependent in a different way than the second. What's the difference? The first one is a necessary dependence. The second one is it's not called an accidental dependence. When for the fire, for the fire produces the heat, the sun produces the light, fine. If you took the fire away, you put the fire out, would the heat continue to exist? It would totally disappear. That's a necessary dependence. The statue, the artist creates the statue. If the artist dies, that statue will continue to live for, until it's destroyed and made into marble chips for a sidewalk. The artist is not necessary for the existence of the statue. He's accidental to it. He produced it, but once he produced it, he can go on his merry way, and it doesn't affect the statue. That's the difference between the two. The first one is necessary. Without the fire, you can't have the heat. Without the sun, you can't have the light. But you can have the statue without the artist. So even though the two produce something, the first is a necessary for the existence of the thing. The second is accidental to it, and that's the difference. So the dependence upon the world on a creator is essential. It's a necessary. It's not accidental. An essential dependence means that the very existence of the dependent thing would cease if you took away that force that's holding it in existence. If God ceased to maintain the world would cease to exist. It's not that he put, like the artist, he puts it into existence and then walks away. That the world would continue to go on and on forever and he's no longer needed. That it's not that. It's the first. Without his continued oversight and maintenance of the world, it would cease to exist. And one day it will cease to exist. He warned us from the very beginning that there will be an end to it. Thus, the existence of the world must cease to exist if the Creator didn't continue to maintain it. And so, unless the world is preserved by a power outside itself that gives it that existence, the world will lapse into non-existence. And so that is the first proof. In other words, so preservation is then a fact, that God or something has to maintain it. The second proof that God is maintaining the universe and that the universe is totally dependent upon God is the Creator, God, freely chooses to give the world existence. But existence is not a thing that the world can take and keep of itself. After creation, if the world could continue to go on its own, we would say it's self-existent. But finite things can't be self-existent. The fact that they are finite means they will have an end, just as they had a beginning. Finite things can't be self-existent. Therefore, the world will have an end. The world itself cannot maintain itself because the world is not self-existent. It's finite. So, God, freely choosing to give the world existence, must freely choose to continue to keep it in existence. It's not something that God started and just walks away from like the artist. The existence, if God did that, the existence that he created, in this case, the world, would cease to exist. It would go back to nothingness. God's free choice to maintain the world in existence we call preservation and conservation. And the very fact that the world is here is proof that it is maintained. Because if it weren't here, if it weren't maintained, it wouldn't be here. It would just disappear. So again, that's your second proof of preservation, that God is preserving the world. The dependence of God upon the infinite power of God is like the dependence of a stone, which a boy has tied to a rock and he's holding it above the ground. As long as the boy is holding the rock doesn't hit the ground. And the boy can hold that rock for as long as he wants. He can swing it around, he can do whatever he wants to, but if he chooses to let go of the rope, the rock's going to fall to the ground. God is that boy holding, and the creation is that rock. God is holding it. God is maintaining it, keeping it in its place, keeping all the laws working, everything in order, according to his design, the design that he planned for the world. When God ceases, or if God ceased to hold it, to maintain it, it would all cease to exist. It would go crashing down. And unlike the rock, which would hit the ground and still continue to exist, it would totally just disappear because the world needs God to maintain itself. So similarly, the world is held out of nothingness by the power of the Creator. And it can remain out of nothingness only so long as the Creator freely chooses to hold it there. And again, remember, this is God's free choice. He was free to create us, and having created us, he's also free to destroy us. But God, being infinitely wise, does not create in order to destroy. That would be irrational. You know, that might be something we as human beings might do. You'd see a kid but remember, he's a kid, build maybe a house of cards or blocks and then smash it because he likes to see the blocks fly in all directions. God's not that. God's not a child. God is all wise. He makes things for a purpose. He doesn't make things to destroy them. He doesn't enjoy destruction. So the point the point to remember here, and the point that we're discussing here, is not that he can destroy the world if he wants to. The point to remember here is that all creatures, whether both bodily and spiritual, would eventually lapse into nothingness if God did not maintain their continued existence. That's the point we're making. Not that someday, ultimately, the world may be destroyed. God may bring the world to it. And by the way, God can choose what he wants to destroy. He can destroy the world and the universe and still maintain us in existence in heaven or hell. When the world comes to an end, that's what's going to happen. Why? Again, because he created the world for us. And he created us for himself. He had a purpose. And he knew all of this when he began. He was all wise. And he knew what we would do. As I said last time, he knew we would mar the plan, but he still created us anyway. But he also warned us continually, our Lord especially, warned us that it will not last forever. We will last forever, but the world will not. And what's the point of that? Constantly harping on that? That you don't put your faith in material things. That they don't become all-consuming and all-important to you, because they won't last. They won't last beyond your own death. That is the end of the world for you, the day you die. You don't need to be afraid of, 3 days of darkness or the end of the world or anything else. You can cross the street tomorrow and get run over by a car, and that's the end of the world as far as you're concerned. But you will still continue to live. Your soul will go on forever. And one day, your body will be reunited to that soul. So your body will also go on forever. But the world will not. So this was a short lesson today, because the next lesson, which is the last lesson, not the last lesson, but the last lesson concerning God, then we're going to look at religion. But the last lesson concerning God is governance, God's governance of the world. And that's a longer lesson, and it's a lot more involved. And I was going to take part of that, but there was no way to make this lesson longer, the normal time limit. I was going to try to bring some of that in here because I didn't want the next lesson to be too long. But the same token, there was no way to break it up in any manageable portion. So we're going to just stick with preservation today, and next time with the governance of the world. So, but the whole point that we're talking about here is that God does maintain the world. Its existence is totally dependent upon Him, and He can. It's not. We're not just something that He put into. He started the ball rolling, and just stands out and watches what happens. No, He maintains everything. And when we talk about God's governance of the world next time, we're also going to talk about divine providence, because that's a factor in His governance of the world. He has a plan, and we don't see it. We never see it. But then we don't have the divine mindset. We only think of ourselves. So, any questions about this?
Questions.
Sure.
What about that theory saying that the Earth is millions and millions old?
There is no proof that the Earth is millions and millions and millions of years old. That's 11 evolutionists want to put forward that idea, but there's a lot of science, but they have no proof. In fact, all the proof that comes out proves the opposite, that we are living in a young world that is probably not more than like maybe 10 or 20,000 years old. That they can date rocks, and the rocks that show that the world is not that old. The fossil records show that the world is not that old, but try to make evolutionists believe that. I mean, we went over that a great deal at the very beginning of the Apologetics. And also in the Bible history, I went through huge. I showed all the information on the fossil record and different scientists, and so there is no. The evolutionists are constantly change their theory, because they try to fit the new information into it, and they're pretty much at this point given up, because there's so much information that they can't fit into their theory, that they're just totally ignoring it now. That the Earth is actually young, but not billions and billions of years old. But even if you accepted that idea that the Earth is billions of years old, the Earth still came from a first cause. Something created it. And that Earth is still maintained by that same essential first cause. Whether you accept it or not, it always comes down to that, because you can, this came from that came from that. The fish that crawled out onto the land and became an amphibian that grew wings and flew away. You listen to evolutionists, that's the way it works. You do realize that. Even if you go back to the fish, where the fish come from the microbes in the pond, where they come from, you go back to that primordial soup, to the first atom that decided to join up with another atom and make a molecule that later became a living thing. Regardless of how far back you go, where did the atom come from? You're back to the first cause. Everything has a cause, has an effect, has a cause. So what caused that? What caused that atom to join up with another atom and become a molecule? Where did the atom come from? again, it always goes back to God, because there has to be one uncreated first cause. He has to be uncreated. He has to be infinite. He had to exist before it to bring it into existence. He had to be all powerful to do that. He has to be unchangeable because he's perfect in every way. And perfection does not admit change. He has to be necessary because and simple. Simple, but he has to be spiritual. No body, because bodies are imperfect. So, something because they have parts, and parts are imperfect. So something that has only one part is spiritual. You have a soul. Your soul is spiritual. That's a simple part. With God, it's only that. He's all soul. He's all spirit. Simple, and therefore unchangeable, almighty, necessary, spiritual, perfect. We went over all wise, all knowing. We looked at his attributes the other time. And again, if you ever need to go back and look at any of these things, they're all up on the YouTube. They're all on the internet. So if you have a question about it, just go back through the again, maybe. And I don't know if I think some of the Bible history is up there too. I'm way behind in putting. I really need to redo a lot of the Bible history over because some of them are very not hard to. The recording is not great. Too much noise, whatever. So I will be doing them over sooner or later. But so does that answer your question? Good.
So there's no dinosaurs. They never existed.
Oh no, dinosaurs existed. They did exist. We got their bones. We know they existed. They died in the flood.
Oh, the flood. Oh,
Yeah.
so not with a meteor.
No, no. Well, what caused the flood? Could have been a meteor breaking, that released the depths of the earth, to flood the land and start the rain that lasted 40. Again, God can use anything to carry out his will. But yeah, but the flood was done because man had sinned and they needed to be punished. So, but yeah, the dinosaurs, they lived. We have proof of that. I mean, we have their bones, but most all of them died in the flood. That's why there may be a few of them still left in the depths of the ocean. The Loch Ness monster is most considered to be an aquatic dinosaur that got landlocked when the waters of the flood receded. There are other lakes in the world, including Lake Champlain in New York, that have possible, again, monsters in them that are, again, possible sea creatures from another era that, again, got locked in the land when the waters of the flood receded. That's logical, and it's possible. Doesn't change the fact that they were created when the rest of the world was created, or that there was a flood. In fact, it gives more evidence to the fact that there was a flood. So, any other questions? Yes.
Um, my mom theorized that it could be that, like, whenever they say dragons, they could have been referencing like flying dinosaurs. That,
Yeah.
of course, obviously not like breathing fire or anything, but like something that could have existed, but not necessarily like mythical dragon.
Right. Exactly. The the We don't know how many of those dinosaurs in one shape or another may have survived the flood. I mean, when when Noah and his wife and his family took animals onto the ark, they took two of every kind. Did they take two dinosaurs? They didn't have to be full grown dinosaurs. Remember, they probably took young juveniles, so that when it came time to repopulate the world with animals, they would have young animals that were too old to breed. Possible they took dinosaurs onto the ark. Very possible. If they took two of every kind of animal, again, God indicated to them which animals to take. And they took up two of every kind of animal, not two of every single animal. Kind is a family group that includes, like the dog family. They didn't take every single dog there was, two of every kind of dog there was. They just took two dogs, two of that family. So, and again, we went through all of this back when we covered with the Bible history. And again, I think those are all up on the internet. If they're not, I'll go check them again. But yeah, it's very possible. And your mother's absolutely right. There were flying dinosaurs, and they would have been very at some point or other. They would have been maybe became a menace to such an extent that people like St. George ended up killing them. Go out and kill them off. They're they're preying on our sheep and our people or whatever. They may have become extinct that way. Uh, who knows? We don't have a lot of information from that period in time. The history, uh, as Noah's children went out to repopulate the world, what they met, what the animals that would turn loose, how many of them survived, um, and again repopulated the world. So dragons are mentioned, by the way, in the Bible, in Genesis. So they did exist, but what they call dragons, we probably call dinosaurs. They don't, just like what they call the unicorn mentioned in Genesis, rhinoceros. There is actually, they have discovered, and I think I showed in the Bible history class, I showed you pictures of one that they unearthed. I think it's in Russia in the Arctic. It looks like a rhinoceros, a very hairy rhinoceros, but it was probably only has one horn, so it's probably what they would call a unicorn. Our idea that a unicorn is a horse with a horn sticking out, yeah. Where do you get that idea? Somebody's fantasy idea if that's what it looks like. It's probably a lot, you know, probably a lot fatter because the one that they found in Siberia is again it's a rhinoceros, but is more got more hair on it than the ones you find in Africa. So yeah, we call them one thing. The people then called them something else. We changed the names for things. The Komodo dragon. I mean, it's called a dragon. It's a huge lizard. I mean, it's about like an alligator, a crocodile that big. Um, but is that's what they call it. But that's not. Again, that's the name that explorers who found it called it. What did the people of the area call it? What did people in past generations call it? And was it bigger than that at one time? Who knows? And again, it's not important unless you're studying those kind of things and you're interested in words and how words change over time. There is a word for that. Uh, Starts with an E and it totally skip. I totally can't remember. It's just slipped my mind. I just had it. Now it's gone. Um, the study of language, how words get changed over time, and peoples who have a language and how they spread out. We can actually follow the migration of peoples by the language that we find in different areas. We know how the Celts got to Ireland because of the language that they speak and where they came from, because we can trace their path. Other peoples who speak that same language, all the way back to the Tower of Babel. All right, any other questions? Nope.